Hello everyone, my name is Associate Professor David Brown. So yes, I'm an academic at Adelaide Law School, and I'm one of the two permanent staff coordinating this graduate certificate in insolvency law that we've launched this year. So maybe first I'll tell you a little bit about Adelaide Law School and why we're launching this program.
Just a little arrow.
Okay, so, Adelaide Law School is a very long-established for an Australian university and a law school. So it's the second oldest law school within Adelaide University, which is one of our group of 8 universities that we have in Australia. Group of 8 tend to be what we call the sandstone universities, and some of the oldest universities where there's a high emphasis on research as well as teaching. So the university is very cosmopolitan with students from all over the world, and is ranked very highly in university worldwide rankings, and lots of opportunities for students from Adelaide to go and study in other countries, as well as students from those countries to come and study in Adelaide. So as I said, it's the second oldest law school in Australia, and I know this is a picture of the Adelaide Law School. It doesn't look like the second oldest law school, but we have much older buildings on campus. This building dates from the 1960s, but we don't, stick in the past. In fact, we are planning to move to a new building under the university's master plan. This will be knocked down, and so in a few years we'll be in a brand new building. So we stand on tradition, but we move with the times as well. So the university and law school has an advisory board, which consists of leading members of the legal profession, judges and eminent practitioners, and that helps us to know where to go and as a sounding board for advice. And we have very distinguished alumni from over 100 or so more years history. Of course, for many years we were the only law school in Adelaide, and so all the judges and senior members of the profession were educated at Adelaide Law School. So moving on to the graduate certificate in insolvency law. I mean, we have a number of programs at postgraduate level in the law school, but none of them until the present time was a specialist program in a particular area of law. But fortunately, we've built up an expertise in that area, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about in a minute. And that's the main reason why we decided to launch a specialist certificate in this area alongside our more general suite of master's courses. Now, insolvency law, the program that we've launched, is relevant to the legal and the accounting profession, because insolvency work is done by accountants largely, but advised by lawyers and working together. And so this program is particularly relevant to those of you who are perhaps studying accounting or law, or accounting and law, as well as general finance and business courses. And so the reason for putting together this certificate is to focus on insolvency law and its importance in modern Australia and indeed the world, and in particular some reforms which have gone through regarding qualifications to become an insolvency professional or practitioner, which we'll talk a bit about more in a while. So this program is a graduate certificate, so it's designed for tertiary graduates, so you've got an undergraduate degree already, or a diploma, so that you qualify, as we'll tell you shortly, about the entrance requirements. So the program will obviously enable you to demonstrate postgraduate level knowledge of insolvency law, which is a specialist field, and therefore the idea of the program is obviously that if you're interested in working in that area or taking further study in that area, this will assist you to progress in your qualifications and your career opportunities. As I mentioned, in particular, some recent law reform requirements have been introduced just a few months ago, whereby if you wanted to be what's called a registered liquidator, which essentially is a person who is enabled to take on the bulk of the type of appointments in the insolvency industry, you have to have studied these 2 courses on insolvency. So given that we were already running a number of courses and had expertise in this area, we were thinking of having a graduate certificate. And so when the law reform proposal was first mooted, we thought this would be an ideal opportunity to introduce our certificate so that those who are interested in a career in insolvency could perhaps take the opportunity to get their qualifications with us. So the other reason why we have really focused on this in the law school as a specialist program at present is really because we have experts in this area. And, you know, somewhat modestly, I say I'm one of the experts whose picture is there. The fact is that myself and Professor Christopher Symes, I was just sitting here thinking about it. I think it might be between us, we have 65 years experience in insolvency, teaching and research, which is quite daunting. But what it means is quite unusual to have that concentration of expertise in a law school, particularly in Australia, in this area. And so that was another reason why Adelaide Law School is doing this rather than somewhere else. So we also have a research unit of which Christopher and I are the co-directors. And so there you'll see the logo for our Regulation of Corporations, Insolvency and Taxation Research Unit, ROCKET. And that's, again, another reason why Adelaide Law School is the place to come and study insolvency law. Because as I said, a group of 8 universities put a high degree of emphasis on research as well as teaching, and so you get the benefit of being taught by people who are researching in this area. So just a little bit more about the sort of things that we're doing in the insolvency world, supporting teaching and research and industry involvement. So, you know, we're both involved in writing the leading textbooks, which of course we use in this program, and editing insolvency journals, corporate journals. In addition, we're involved in a number of government and industry body roles and international bodies and insolvency as well. So now we're just going to turn to some entry requirements and what's involved in this program. So as I said, you know, the program is designed for tertiary students, and so it's a graduate entry program. It is possible, perhaps, if you've got experience and expertise, apart from, you know, rather than a university degree, that, you know, your case might be considered, but generally speaking, it's a graduate entry program. So for both domestic and international students, the GPA is 5, minimum GPA of 5. And for domestic students, and I suppose for international students too, actually, there's a possibility of cross-credit on a case-by-case basis. We would look at whether the work that you've done in another equivalent level of program could be cross-credited. In particular, I've mentioned there, ARETA, which is the industry body in Australia for the insolvency industry. They do run a program which complies with this new law requirement for insolvency education. And so we would look at the possibility of cross-crediting people who did the ARETA course. So that's people who've been in the industry for a while and have done that course. If you're an international student, you also have to meet the language proficiency requirements as well. So this is a graduate certificate, which means that the standard duration for it, as it's 12 units, that's essentially 4 courses. And so in terms of the duration, it is possible to do that as 6 months full-time. So for domestic students, you could study the whole program in 6 months, or you could take the time and do it over 1 year as a part-time, which is particularly useful if you're working. For international students, it has to be done full-time, and that's one of the requirements for international students doing programs at this level. So what we've put in the regulations to qualify for the graduate certificate, as I said, it's 12 units. We do have some core courses. So we've got 2 core courses, which each course is worth 3 units, so 6 units of core courses, and then you can choose from the electives, do 2 more electives to get your 12 units. So what are those courses that we have? Well, the core courses are called Introduction to Australian Law, and secondly, Insolvency Law. So with Introduction to Australian Law, that's a course that we make everybody do coming into our master's or postgraduate programs who has not done a law degree, because it's sort of essential to know, obviously, about important aspects of Australian law. And so that course is actually an online course that we offer in every semester. So if you don't have a law degree, because you've got a business degree or finance or accounting or arts, whatever it is, we'll make you do that course. You don't have to do it if you've got a law degree. Then you have another 3 units, you can do another elective. The Insolvency Law course, because it's a graduate certificate in Insolvency Law, obviously that's a compulsory course. So 9 times out of 10, you will have to do that core course. Again, if you're cross-credited from another program, or the ARITA course, which I mentioned, where they obviously do Insolvency Law, then we would look at giving you cross-credit for that. But these courses are compulsory for the certificate, unless you have equivalents already in some other degree. From the list of electives that we've got, quite a few different courses that you can do. So we cover not just domestic insolvency law, but also international and comparative. So I teach comparative corporate rescue, where we look at different jurisdictions and compare their systems of rescuing companies and businesses. And so this year I'm quite excited. I'm teaching that course in October as an intensive over 2 weekends. And there's been quite a lot happening in Singapore. And I've never focused on Singapore before. So this year I'm going to look at what's been happening in Singapore, because Singapore is trying to become a hub for insolvency activity. International Insolvency Law is a course we added a few years ago to our programs, and we might teach that, or we might get a guest from overseas, an eminent professor or someone from the profession to come in and teach that course. And a number of other courses that we have: corporate governance, which is relevant to insolvency, although it's not exclusively an insolvency course. Personal property security law, which I teach, is a relatively new area for Australian law, but a very important one for insolvency situations. So they're all 3-unit courses, but if you wanted to, you could do a dissertation on a subject of your choice, a research paper, 12,000 words, I think, something like that, and that counts for 6 units, so it's double. And then lastly, we've got a new course coming online next year. I have to say pending final approval, because as at yesterday, we had faculty approval, but it needs to go to the university. So I can't say it's definitely going to happen, but I could say it's probably going to happen. So that's a personal bankruptcy law and practice course, we do that at undergraduate level at the moment. We don't have a postgraduate course on that. So that will add an extra dimension to this suite of programs. And so it could be possible for you to choose corporate and personal insolvency topics in your program, or to choose a dissertation if there was something you particularly that caught your eye that you wanted to explore further. So this program is designed to be flexible. This is a trend of Adelaide University's courses now, to be blended learning and give students more opportunity to combine their work with their other activities. their study work with their other activities, and also to take the opportunities to have different learning methods and different methods of online learning and assessment as well, for more of a variety of study and assessment. So in particular with this program, of course, we are to some extent aiming this program at people who might be in the industry or starting out in the insolvency industry or the finance or legal profession and wanting to get a bit of a specialisation in this area. So of course we're mindful that they may be in employment already and therefore might need to combine study with work. And so a number of courses are fully online. In particular at the moment, the Insolvency Law course, that core course, is online. And then all the other courses are currently intensive courses, as I mentioned, over 2 weekends, or they might be in a block of 4 days, for example, Monday to Thursday or something like that. And so during the year, we will have these different modes operating. Now, eventually, we hope to have more courses fully online to make the program more accessible to people overseas and interstate. But we will always have some face-to-face contact in some of the courses so that we can have some workshops and seminars in Adelaide for our local and international students who have come into Adelaide campus. So that's why it's blended, so mixing both features. But the opportunities for that blended learning approach in insolvency work very well because we can do things like bring practitioners into webinars, such as this one, to talk to the students as well. Now, at the point where we've got a guest speaker today from the industry, Oliver Sheahan, who's going to talk to us a little bit about his background and work in the industry, particularly here in Adelaide, and how he sees this certificate as assisting in that regard. So I'm going to hand over to Oliver now.
Thanks very much, David. I swear that you did glance over at me when you said we're talking about distinguished alumni, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. Look, I think this is obviously a pretty exciting initiative by the uni. I think with the exception of ARETA, it seems like the uni is the only body that's actually doing something like this proactively. So I think that's great to see. My background is I did a Bachelor of Commerce majoring in International Business at University of Adelaide, and I did a Bachelor of Laws as well, and then did the Graduate Diploma of Legal Practice, which was I think it was a guinea pig course at the time, run jointly by the uni and by the Law Society of South Australia. So very familiar with the workings of the Uni of Adelaide and the professional staff and the academics here, and couldn't recommend them highly enough. And I'm not just saying that because you're sitting next to me, David. So no, look, I think given that the program is being led by you and by Chris Symes, I think these students are going to be in pretty good hands. Look, I think the Law Reform Act and the changes that have come in, partly on 1 March and partly on 1 September in a couple of months' time, I think it's fair to say it's the biggest shake-up from an industry perspective, certainly since the Harman report came out. So I know a lot of the firms are spending quite a lot in terms of time and resources in getting up to speed with the various changes. A lot of the provisions are simply, a fresh slate in terms of, what firms are required to do. And I think that's the case from both an accounting firm perspective and a law firm perspective. So, even if there are practitioners who are qualified, perhaps it's time to look at doing this sort of course to, get up to speed with things. So, look, I think it's probably the sort of course that has, quite a broad application in terms of who would be interested in doing it. I think it's certainly very exciting that the uni's doing that.
Thank you, Oliver. And just a couple of questions. One is, as somebody who's done law and accounting undergraduate studies, what do you see as the benefits for you as now in the insolvency industry of having that background in law and accounting and finance?
I mean, I'm probably a bit biased. Our firm, Sheahan Lock Partners, is it's an accounting insolvency firm, but our focus is heavily on insolvency litigation. So, from a personal perspective, having both disciplines is obviously incredibly important to us. But I think, generally speaking, insolvency accounting, in a lot of ways, is more of a study of law than it is of accounting, and more of a practice of law than it is of accounting. I know that every firm deals with, with lawyers, with legal proceedings, if not on a daily basis, certainly on a weekly basis. So I think certainly need to have that background knowledge of accounting to at least understand what's going on in terms of reviewing the books and things like that. But look, in terms of actually being able to, to run claims and, run antecedent transaction claims and those sorts of things, or actually at least understand what's going on, it's certainly very important, in my view, to have both the accounting and the law background.
And obviously you're working here in Adelaide, so I don't know whether you formed an impression of this sort of market more generally in Australia, but I guess in terms of students might want to know about the career opportunities. From my perspective, it seems there's always insolvency happening in the world. There is. So there's always work to do, I guess. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, there is. I mean, look, it's a pretty, I think it's a pretty dynamic and active industry, the insolvency industry. I'm lucky enough to work both in Adelaide and in Sydney. And look, there's a lot of appointments happening. I suppose the general, I suppose business market in certainly in South Australia at the moment is not particularly busy, which is only good for insolvency firms. So look, I think there's certainly a lot of work out there. There's a lot of firms around. I think there's a lot of opportunities for students to get involved in the industry and to practice what they're learning, for sure.
And of course, I suppose perhaps, with your firm's emphasis on litigation, not doing so much of this, but obviously restructuring has become a big thing. So ARETA, for example, the industry body called themselves, they changed their name. It used to be Insolvency. Now it's got R for restructuring in the title, because a lot of emphasis being put on rescuing businesses rather than just dealing with a mess once they've collapsed, And so that restructuring work is almost, has required some sort of different skills and people skills as well. And so I think even if there isn't much insolvency happening, which there usually is, it doesn't matter so much these days because there's also this other type of work dealing with companies who maybe not terribly in trouble so that they're going to become insolvent tomorrow, but in need of some restructuring, some help with their debts and capital structures. So that type of work is also happening as well, and that's become part of it. And certainly in the program, as I said, we talk about corporate rescue, and do quite a lot of work these days on that sort of informal rescue, dealing with turning around businesses so that they don't become insolvent. Yeah, so that's another area, I guess, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think you mentioned the industry body changing its name to take into account the increased levels of restructuring and turnaround in the industry. I think that's it only adds to this idea of I suppose the currency of this program. I think it's timely and as important as ever now to stay on top of the changes in the industry. So, yeah. Yeah,
and I think also things are happening, as I said, in other parts of the world, Singapore, the EU, and of course, whilst they don't necessarily affect people working solely in Australia, the global world, obviously a lot of business is dealing with overseas creditors or debtors, and so that is also useful for us to keep an eye on what developments are, and also because we can learn and look at our law in the light of developments overseas as well. So that's all from me. So Sarah, shall we see if anyone's got some questions for us?
So we've come to the part of the webinar where it's your chance to ask any questions. So please feel free to click on the Q&A button at the top of your screen and type in your question if you haven't already. I'll just have a look and see if we've got any questions. Doesn't look as though we do at the moment. That's okay. I think we'll just pop to the next slide, which I think has some contact.
Have you got any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. Very interesting. I'll just pop along.
So I think if you do have any questions, that's the Law Inquiry email address, where you'll be direct. If you send your email to that address, it will be directed to our postgraduate student advisor, and she will answer your questions. And if she needs to ask me, you'll get an answer through her. Okay, so don't be hesitant to contact us if anything occurs to you after watching or participating in this webinar.